The lock clicked. That sound, heavy, metallic, final, sealed us inside room 412. I stood there, clutching the strap of my battered canvas weekender, the fabric rough against my palm. Tessa glided past me, her movements silent and predatory. Her Rimowa suitcase whispered across the carpet, a silver monolith of executive status that made my thrift store luggage look like a prop from a bad movie. She didn't look back. She just set her bag on the rack and checked her watch. "Budget optimization," she said, her voice cool, detached, and utterly unconvincing. "The quarterly targets are tight. We all make sacrifices." I stared at the back of her blazer. I knew the Q3 numbers. We were up 40%. This wasn't austerity. It was a choice. And as the silence of the room settled around us, thick and suffocating, I realized I had no idea what kind of sacrifice we were actually making. To understand the sheer insanity of that moment, you have to understand Tessa. In the office, they called her the Teflon Duchess. It started as a joke in the break room, a nod to her impeccably tailored suits and the way mistakes, excuses, and human emotions just slid right off her surface without leaving a scratch. She was terrifyingly efficient. She didn't walk. She executed a trajectory. She didn't have conversations. She exchanged data packets. As her junior associate, my job description was ostensibly strategic support. But in reality, I was a meteorologist. I tracked the climate of Tessa. I knew that a single tap of her Mont Blanc pen meant impatience, and a double tap meant someone was about to be fired. I knew that if she wore the navy blazer, it was a good day. But if she wore the charcoal one, I should keep my head down. I had spent 2 years in her orbit, maintaining a professional distance measured in light years. I was the reliable one, the one who had the files ready before she asked, the one who knew how she took her coffee, black, specific temperature, no sleeve, and the one who never, ever crossed the line. I had buried my attraction to her under layers of corporate deference so thick they felt like geological strata. You don't flirt with the Teflon Duchess. You don't even think about it. You just survive her. I watched the way her hands moved during presentations, precise and elegant, and then I would force myself to look at the spreadsheet. It was a discipline. Then came the memo. It landed in our inboxes on a Tuesday afternoon, flagged with high importance. Fiscal Responsibility Initiative, Q4 travel adjustments. It was standard corporate jargon until paragraph 3, which hit the office like a bomb. To maximize resource allocation, junior and senior staff traveling to the same location will now utilize dual occupancy accommodations. The office went silent. It was absurd. We were a firm that flew business class and catered lunches from places that didn't put prices on the menu. The idea that we needed to save $200 a night in hotels was laughable. I waited for the retraction. I waited for Tessa to storm into the COO's office and demand it be rescinded. Instead, she walked out of her office, a sheet of paper in hand, and stopped at my desk. The scent of sandalwood and cold air hit me before she even spoke. "Read the memo?" she asked. She didn't look at me. She was looking at a point somewhere over my left shoulder, her expression unreadable. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my pulse jumped. "Seems extreme." "It's policy," she said, cutting off any debate. "We're going to Chicago next week. I've already updated the booking. Double queen." She walked away before I could process the information. Tessa, who didn't like people standing too close to her in the elevator, had voluntarily booked us into a room where we would sleep 6 feet apart. I sat there staring at my screen, feeling a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the office thermostat. It didn't make sense, unless it did. That week was a blur of cognitive dissonance. I watched her in meetings, dismantling vendors with a raised eyebrow, looking every inch the untouchable executive. But every time our eyes met across the conference table, the air felt different, thicker, charged. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself it was just the stress of the upcoming trip. But the austerity memo felt less like a cost-cutting measure and more like a permission slip. My friends told me to report it to HR. They said it was weird, controlling, a power move, and maybe it was. But deep down, in the part of my brain that didn't care about quarterly targets or HR protocols, I didn't want to report it. I wanted to see what would happen when the Teflon Duchess took off her armor. The notification for the Chicago itinerary hit my inbox late Friday. Flight UA 642, seat 12B, Economy Plus, right next to 12A. And below that, the hotel confirmation, the Palmer House. 1 room, 2 guests. The reality of it settled in my stomach, heavy and hot. We weren't just colleagues anymore. We were roommates. And the distance I had carefully curated for 2 years was about to collapse into the space between 2 hotel beds. The threshold of the aircraft acted like a pressure valve. Stepping onto the plane, the air grew stale and recycled, but the tension between us spiked, fresh and sharp. Watching Tessa navigate the narrow aisle of Economy Plus was like watching a panther try to make herself comfortable in a pet carrier. She belonged in the hushed champagne-tinted world of first class, where legroom was a right, not a privilege. Here, in row 12, she was just another passenger fighting for overhead bin space. She hoisted her Rimowa with a fluid, practiced grace, ignoring the businessman behind her who offered to help. When she slid into the window seat, she didn't just sit, she arranged herself, smoothing her blazer with a precision that suggested she could command the fabric to repel wrinkles through sheer force of will. I took the middle seat. There's a specific, intimate horror to the middle seat when you are sitting next to your boss. The physical boundaries that usually defined our relationship, the width of a desk, the length of a conference table, were instantly obliterated. I sat down, and the reality of the situation hit me with the force of a physical blow. Her shoulder pressed against mine. It wasn't a brush or a bump. It was a sustained, constant point of contact. The wool of her blazer scratched slightly against the cotton of my shirt, a tactile reminder that the Teflon Duchess was, in fact, solid matter. I tried to shrink into myself, to fold my shoulders inward like an origami crane. But the architecture of the seat made it impossible. We were locked together, hip to hip, shoulder to shoulder, in a space smaller than a confession booth. Then began the silent, high-stakes diplomacy of the armrest. In the unwritten laws of air travel, the middle seat owns the armrests. But this was Tessa. She didn't aggressively claim the territory. She simply occupied it. She placed her elbow on the back half of the rest, leaving the front half technically free, but the heat radiating from her arm created a force field I was terrified to breach. I kept my arms crossed over my chest, a defensive posture that did nothing to stop the sensory invasion. She opened her laptop, the screen privacy filter turning the display into a black void from my angle. She started typing, her fingers moving with a rhythmic, percussive cadence that cut through the drone of the engines. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of efficiency, of a mind that could compartmentalize chaos into neat rows and columns. But while she was building spreadsheets, I was drowning in her proximity. The air around us thickened, heavy with her scent. It was sandalwood and something sharper, like expensive gin and cold rain. It wasn't a perfume you wore to be noticed. It was a perfume you wore to be remembered. It drifted into my space, bypassing my defenses and settling deep in my lungs. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on the safety card in the seat pocket, but my other senses were in overdrive. I could feel the warmth of her thigh just inches from mine. I could hear the subtle shift in her breathing when she hit a snag in her data. The static charge between our arms felt like it was building toward a spark that would short-circuit the entire plane. We were somewhere over Ohio when the atmosphere decided to intervene. The plane didn't just shake, it dropped. It was that stomach-flipping, gravity-reversing lurch that makes even seasoned travelers gasp. The cabin lights flickered. My hand, acting on pure survival instinct, shot out to grip the armrest. At the exact same second, Tessa's hand did the same. Her palm landed on top of my knuckles. The contact was electric. It wasn't the polite, accidental brush of strangers. It was a firm, grounding grip. Her skin was shockingly warm, her fingers strong. For a heartbeat, the turbulence didn't matter. The sudden drop in altitude didn't matter. The only thing that existed was the weight of her hand on mine, pressing me down, anchoring me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, waiting for her to recoil, waiting for the excuse me and the retreat to professional distance. She didn't move. The plane shuddered again, finding its lift, leveling out with a groan of hydraulics. The danger had passed in seconds, but the connection held. Her thumb brushed against the side of my hand, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement that felt louder than the engines. It wasn't a mistake, it was a reassurance. Or maybe it was a test. She held on for 3 seconds too long. 3 seconds where the hierarchy of boss and subordinate dissolved into just two bodies seeking stability in the chaos. Then, as smoothly as she had engaged, she withdrew. Her hand returned to the keyboard. The typing resumed. But the rhythm was different now. Slower, heavier. The rest of the flight was a blur of white noise. We landed in Chicago under a slate gray sky, the cabin crew announcing the local time with cheerful detachment. We deplaned in silence, the physical separation feeling colder than the air outside. But in the cab ride to the Palmer House, sitting on opposite sides of the back seat, the silence wasn't empty. It was vibrating. I watched the city lights streak past the rain-slicked window, still feeling the ghost of her grip on my hand, realizing with a terrifying clarity that the turbulence hadn't stopped. We had just brought it down to earth with us. The lobby of the Palmer House was a cathedral of frescoed ceilings and velvet quiet, a space designed to make you feel small and expensive. We approached the front desk like two foreign dignitaries negotiating a peace treaty. The clerk, a young man with a tired smile and a name tag that read Kevin, typed furiously for a moment before looking up. His gaze flicked between us, Tessa in her sharp architectural blazer, and me, trying to look like I belonged there, despite my scuffed boots. 1 room, 2 queens, Kevin confirmed, his eyes softening into a conspiratorial squint. We're actually fully booked on the standard floors, so I've upgraded you to the executive level. Better view. And I assume 1 key is fine for the efficiency. He thought we were together, not colleagues. Together. He read the tension, the proximity, the way we moved as a unit, and he slotted us into the category of couple on a tense weekend getaway. I opened my mouth to correct him, to clarify that she was the vice president of strategy, and I was the person who carried the backup HDMI cables. But Tessa beat me to it. Efficiency is paramount, she said, her voice smooth and cool. She didn't correct him, she didn't recoil. She just took the keycard with 2 fingers, sliding it into her pocket like it was a classified document. Thank you, Kevin. The elevator. Right up to the 21st floor was silent, but the air pressure felt like we were deep underwater. She hadn't corrected him. The Teflon Duchess, who once sent a 3-paragraph email correcting a vendor on the proper use of a semicolon, had let a stranger believe we were sharing a bed for personal reasons. I stared at the floor indicator numbers climbing higher, trying to regulate my breathing. Room 2114 was spacious, elegant, and terrifying. It was dominated by 2 queen beds separated by a nightstand that looked about 20 inches wide. That was the demilitarized zone. 20 inches of mahogany between my career and my sanity. Tessa walked in first, dropping her key on the desk and immediately claiming the bed by the window. It was a subtle power move. She took the view. I took the door. Then came the unpacking ritual, a process that felt strangely illicit to watch. In the office, Tessa was a finished product. She arrived perfect and left perfect. But here, the process was visible. She hoisted the Rimowa onto the luggage rack and unzipped it. I tried to look away, to focus on my own chaotic canvas bag, but my eyes drifted. I saw the precision of her packing cubes, and then I saw what she was taking out. Gone was the armor. She laid out a pair of sleep shorts and a camisole made of slate gray silk. They were elegant, yes, but they were undeniably intimate. They were things you wore when you wanted to feel skin against fabric. Seeing them laid out on the crisp white hotel duvet felt like a violation of a security clearance I didn't have. I quickly shoved my oversized t-shirt and flannel pants into a drawer, suddenly ashamed of my cotton utilitarianism. "I'll take the bathroom first," she announced, grabbing her dop kit. "I have a call at 7 a.m. "Sure," I managed. "Go ahead." The door clicked shut, and the lock turned. A moment later, the sound of the shower started. Old hotels have acoustic plumbing. The pipes sing. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the rush of water, unable to stop my brain from constructing the image of what was happening 10 feet away. The steam would be filling the room. The Teflon was washing off. It was a sensory intrusion that I couldn't block out. I picked up a magazine, stared at a watch advertisement for 5 minutes without reading a word, and waited. When the water stopped, the silence that followed was worse. The door opened, and she stepped out in a cloud of humidity. She was wearing the silk. Her hair was down, damp and dark, falling over her shoulders in a way I had never seen. She looked smaller, softer, and infinitely more dangerous. She didn't look at me. She went straight to her bed, pulled back the covers, and slid in. "Lights," she commanded softly. I fumbled for the switch. The room plunged into darkness, save for the ambient city glow filtering through the curtains. I climbed into my own bed, the sheets cold and stiff. The gap between us felt microscopic. I could hear the rustle of her pillow. I could hear the steady, rhythmic intake of her breath. "Good night," she said. Her voice was low, stripped of its corporate cadence. "Good night, Tessa." I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my body rigid. The air in the room was charged, heavy with the scent of her sandalwood soap, and the undeniable fact that the woman who signed my paychecks was sleeping arm's length away. The budget optimization excuse felt thin in the daylight, but in the dark, it felt like a transparent lie we were both protecting. I didn't sleep for hours. I just listened to her breathe, wondering if she was asleep or if she was lying there too, staring at the same darkness, measuring the distance between us. By the second night, the fragile truce of the twin beds had dissolved into a war of attrition against a looming deadline. The client pitch was at 8 a.m., and the presentation deck was, in Tessa's words, structurally unsound. We had ordered room service at 9, club sandwiches that went cold and untouched, and turned the hotel room into a crisis center. The elegant mahogany desk which looked nice in brochures, was functionally useless for two people trying to overhaul a 40-slide strategy deck. It was too small, too cramped, and the ergonomic chair was a torture device designed by someone who hated lumbar support. At 1 a.m., Tessa cracked. She stood up, stretched her arms over her head, a movement that exposed a sliver of pale skin at her waist, where her silk camisole rode up, and snapped the laptop shut. "The desk is impossible," she declared, rubbing her temples. "Bring the files. We're moving." She didn't wait for a consensus. She walked over to my bed, my designated safe zone, and sat down on the edge of the duvet. She patted the empty space beside her, a gesture that was both a command and an invitation. "Come on, we need to fix the Q3 projections before I lose my mind." I froze. The bed was the one boundary we hadn't crossed. It was the raft I clung to in this ocean of weird intimacy. But she was already opening the laptop, the blue light illuminating her face, casting shadows that made her cheekbones look even sharper. I swallowed the lump in my throat, grabbed the stack of printouts, and sat down. The mattress dipped under my weight, tilting me slightly toward her. Gravity, it seemed, was conspiring against my professionalism. We were sitting side by side, legs extended, backs against the headboard. The distance between us was non-existent. Her left leg was pressed against my right, a long line of warmth that seared through the thin fabric of my pajama pants. She had discarded the blazer hours ago, and without the shoulder pads, she felt smaller, more human. Her hair was loose, a dark curtain that fell forward every time she leaned toward the screen, and she kept tucking it behind her ear with an impatient flick of her wrist. "Look at this," she murmured, pointing at a bar graph on slide 12. "The growth. Trajectory is flat. It looks like we're stalling. We need to pivot the data to highlight the retention rates." "I can adjust the y-axis," I said, my voice sounding rough in the quiet room. "It'll make the curve look steeper." "Do it," she said. I reached for the trackpad. At the same moment, she reached out to point at a specific data point. Our hands collided. It wasn't a violent crash. It was a soft, sliding impact. My fingers brushed against the back of her hand, and then, instead of pulling away, her hand settled over mine. Her skin was cool, smooth, and the weight of her palm on my knuckles paralyzed me. The room suddenly felt vacuum sealed. The hum of the mini fridge, the distant wail of a siren, the drone of the air conditioner. It all vanished. The only sound left in the universe was the thudding of my own heart against my ribs. We stayed like that for a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity. Her hand on mine. My hand on the laptop. The cursor blinking rhythmically on the screen, waiting for a command that wasn't coming. Tessa turned her head. She was so close I could count the individual lashes framing her eyes. Her gaze wasn't on the screen anymore. It was on me. It traveled from my eyes down to my mouth, lingering there with a weight that felt like a physical touch. Her lips parted slightly, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a question. The air between us was thick, heavy with the scent of her sandalwood and the heat radiating from our touching legs. "The y-axis," she whispered. Her voice was husky, stripped of the boardroom polish. "Right," I breathed, unable to look away. "The axis." She didn't move her hand. Her thumb grazed the side of my index finger, a microscopic caress that sent a shockwave straight to my spine. It was a breach of protocol so flagrant it should have triggered an HR investigation. But in the dim light of room 2114, it just felt inevitable. Then the laptop screen flickered and dimmed, the power save mode kicking in. The sudden change in light broke the spell. Tessa blinked, the Teflon coating slamming back into place. She pulled her hand back as if she'd been burned, turning her attention violently back to the screen. "Fix it," she said, her voice clipped and tight. And then let's wrap this up. We need sleep. She stayed on the bed while I made the edits, but the warmth was gone. She sat rigid, arms crossed, staring at the data with a focus that felt desperate. When I finally closed the laptop 10 minutes later, she stood up immediately, smoothing her silk shorts with trembling hands. She walked back to her side of the room without a word, the distance between the beds suddenly feeling like a canyon. But as I turned off the lamp, I saw her touch her own hand, tracing the spot where her skin had met mine before she pulled the duvet up to her chin and turned her back to me. The merger was complete, but the acquisition cost was going to be ruinous. If Chicago was about the shock of proximity, Seattle was about the erosion of time. The Pacific Northwest didn't just reign, it erased the world. We were scheduled to fly out at 2 p.m., but a dense, suffocating fog rolled off the Puget Sound and swallowed SeaTac whole. The notification on Tessa's phone was terse. Flight canceled. Reschedule pending. We weren't going anywhere. We were trapped in a boutique hotel in downtown Seattle, suspended in a gray, watery limbo. For the first hour, Tessa was the Duchess. She paced the length of the room, phone pressed to her ear, barking orders at a travel agent who had no control over atmospheric conditions. She was a whirlwind of kinetic energy, her heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm against the hardwood. But there is only so much fighting you can do against the weather. Around 4 p.m., the battery on her phone died, and with it, her resistance. She stood by the window, staring out at the white void where the city skyline used to be. The room was quiet, save for the relentless drumming of rain against the glass. It was a heavy, insulating sound that made the world outside feel theoretical. "I'm starving," she said, not turning around. It was an admission of defeat. "Room service?" I asked from the bed, where I'd been pretending to read a report for 2 hours. "Yes, and not a salad. I want something terrible. I want carbohydrates." When the food arrived, a tower of truffle fries and 2 burgers, there was no discussion about where to eat. The small bistro table was covered in her charging cables and my laptop. The beds were for sleeping, so, without a word, the vice president of strategy sat on the floor. It was a jarring visual recalibration. Tessa, who treated posture like a religion, was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, leaning back against the side of the bed. I joined her, settling on the floor a few feet away. We ate in a comfortable silence, dipping fries into ketchup, the corporate hierarchy dissolving with every bite. The air in the room felt different here, down at floor level. It was less charged, more grounded. Then the armor came off. It started with the blazer. She shrugged it off, tossing it onto the bed behind her, with a careless motion that would have been unthinkable in the office. Underneath, she wore a simple white silk blouse, the top button undone. But the real transformation happened a moment later. She reached up, her fingers finding the pins that held her severe, architectural bun in place. I stopped chewing. I watched, mesmerized, as she pulled them out one by one, dropping them onto the carpet. Clink, clink, clink. With a final shake of her head, the structure collapsed. Her hair fell around her shoulders, dark and heavy, softening the sharp angles of her face. She ran her hands through it, massaging her scalp with a groan of pure relief that made my stomach flip. "God," she breathed, closing her eyes. "That thing gives me a headache." "Why do you wear it?" I asked. The question was too personal, too direct. But the fog seemed to have dampened the usual rules of engagement. She opened her eyes and looked at me. Her gaze wasn't the laser-focused stare of the boardroom. It was tired, unguarded. Because when I wear it, people listen to the data. When I wear it down, they look at the woman. And I need them to look at the data. She took a sip of her wine, her eyes locking onto mine over the rim of the glass. You don't have that problem, she observed quietly. You just exist. It must be nice. I have my own armor, I countered, thinking of the way I made myself invisible, the way I hid my feelings for her behind efficiency. We all do? True, she murmured. She leaned her head back against the mattress, her neck exposed, pale and vulnerable. Though this trip, the armor feels heavy. It saves the company money, I said, testing the waters. The lie hung between us, fragile and obvious. Tessa turned her head slowly to look at me. A faint, knowing smile played on her lips, not the sharp, triumphant smile of a closed deal, but something softer, sadder. Yes, she whispered, holding my gaze until the air in the room grew thick enough to choke on. It's very economical. She didn't look away. For a long, terrifying minute, we just sat there, on the floor, surrounded by room service trays and the sound of the rain, acknowledging the truth without speaking it. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything we weren't saying. The flight home the next morning was silent, but the dynamic had shifted. The fear was gone. I wasn't terrified of the Teflon Duchess anymore. I had seen her sitting on the floor with ketchup on her thumb. I had seen her hair down. And as I watched her sleep in the window seat, her head resting against the plastic wall, I knew we were past the point of return. The fog had lifted, but we were still lost. Manhattan wasn't just another stop on the itinerary. It was the summit. We were there to close the acquisition that had been looming over the fiscal year like a storm front. The stakes were absolute, the pressure was physical, and the city itself felt like it was vibrating with a frequency that matched the tension in my chest. We arrived at the hotel just past midnight, exhausted, rain-soaked, and running on nothing but adrenaline and bad airport coffee. The lobby was a sensory assault of polished marble and low, thumping bass from the attached bar, a stark contrast to the quiet dread settling in my stomach. I stood by the luggage cart, watching Tessa approach the reception desk. She moved with that familiar, lethal grace, her trench coat belted tight, her posture defying the late hour. She was ready to execute the check-in protocol. 2 keys, 2 beds, efficiency, above all. But as she spoke to the clerk, the rhythm broke. I saw her spine stiffen. The clerk, a young man with an undercut and a nervous habit of touching his tie, was typing frantically. He stopped, winced, and looked up. I didn't need to hear the words to know the logistics had just collapsed. I walked over, the wheels of my suitcase catching on the plush rug. Is there a problem? I asked, stepping into the blast zone. The system, the clerk explained, his voice tight with the specific panic of someone who knows they are about to disappoint a VIP. We had a server migration this afternoon. It wiped a block of reservations. Your double queen request, it's gone. The hotel is at capacity for Fashion Week. I don't have a single room with 2 beds left in the building. The silence that followed was louder than the lobby music. Tessa stared at him, her expression unreadable, calculating the variables. What do you have? She asked. Her voice was calm, but it had an edge that could cut glass. I have the penthouse king suite, he offered, looking relieved to have a solution, however awkward. It's an upgrade. Significant square footage, but it's just the 1 bed. A California king. I waited for Tessa to pivot. I waited for her to demand he call the Ritz, the Mandarin, or even the Marriott down the street. We had the corporate card. The austerity excuse was flimsy, but surely sharing a mattress was the breaking point. This was the moment the lie should have died. Tessa checked her watch. She looked at the rain lashing against the revolving doors. She looked at me, her gaze sweeping over my exhaustion, my damp hair, the sheer weariness radiating off us both. Take it, she said. My breath hitched. Tessa, We can... It's 1 a.m., she cut in, taking the single black key card the clerk offered. I have a board meeting in 7 hours. I am not spending the next 45 minutes in a cab trying to find another hotel. It's a sunk cost. We take the upgrade. She turned and walked toward the elevators before I could argue. The logic was sound, professionally speaking, but emotionally, it was a landslide. I followed her, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The elevator ride was a vertical coffin of silence. The mirrored walls reflected us back at ourselves, two women in business wear, standing a careful foot apart, hurtling toward a situation that no amount of corporate jargon could sanitize. We watched the floor numbers climb, the red digital readout counting down the seconds, until we had to face the reality of the night. Room 4004 was massive. It had a living area, a wet bar, and a view of the skyline that cost more than my annual salary. But I didn't look at the view. I looked at the bed. It dominated the center of the room, a vast white island of thread count and down. It looked impossibly comfortable and terrified me more than anything else in my life. It wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a challenge. Tessa locked the door behind us, the click echoing in the cavernous suite. She didn't look at the bed. She walked to the window, staring out at the blurred city lights, her reflection ghostly in the glass. The budget excuse was gone. The efficiency was gone. There was just the room, the rain, and the one bed waiting to pull us under. The logistics of sharing a bed with your boss are not covered in the employee handbook. There is no subsection in the HR policy regarding the appropriate distance to maintain from a vice president's sleeping form, nor is there a protocol for how to handle the terrifying intimacy of hearing her brush her teeth while you sit on the edge of a California king, questioning every life choice that led to this moment. The suite was quiet, the air thick with the humidity of the storm outside and the unspoken panic inside. We treated the bedtime ritual like a bomb disposal operation. I took the bathroom first, changing into my flannel pants and t-shirt with frantic speed, staring at my reflection in the backlit mirror. I looked terrified. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the flush of heat that had settled in my cheeks, but it was useless. When I exited, Tessa was waiting. She didn't look up from her phone, but I saw her posture shift, a subtle tightening of her shoulders. She brushed past me into the bathroom, the door clicking shut with a finality that echoed in the silent room. I approached the bed. It was an ocean of white linen, vast and terrifying. I chose the left side closest to the window and sat down. The mattress was soft, too soft. It was the kind of memory foam that remembers your sins. When Tessa emerged, the room seemed to shrink. She was back in the slate gray silk, the fabric rippling like water over her skin. She didn't look at me. She walked to the bed, grabbed 2 extra pillows from the closet, and marched to the center of the mattress. "Architecture," she said, her voice tight. She placed the pillows in a line down the exact center of the bed. A demarcation line for comfort. It was a pillow wall. The Teflon Duchess, who negotiated multi-million-dollar mergers without blinking, had built a pillow fort to protect herself from her junior associate. It was performative, flimsy, and completely necessary. "Right," I said, sliding under the duvet on my side. "Comfort." She turned off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness, save for the ambient glow of the city filtering through the rain-streaked windows. She climbed in on her side. I felt the mattress dip, a seismic shift that registered in my spine. The bed connected us. Every movement she made, the settling of her hips, the adjustment of her shoulder, traveled through the springs and into my body. We lay there like 2 effigies on a tomb, rigid, staring at the ceiling, separated by a row of down-filled barriers that felt woefully inadequate against the gravitational pull of the room. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night, Tessa." I didn't think I would sleep. I lay there, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, trying to synchronize my own to hide the fact that my heart was hammering against my ribs. But exhaustion is a powerful anesthetic. The sound of the rain and the warmth of the duvet eventually pulled me under. I woke up in the disorientation of deep night. The room was a different shade of gray now, the storm having passed. I blinked, trying to remember where I was. The pillow wall, the suite, Tessa. Then I realized I couldn't move my left arm. The wall had been breached. At some point in the velvet darkness, the pillows had shifted, pushed aside by the unconscious movements of sleep. Tessa had rolled over. She wasn't on her side of the demarcation line anymore. She was in the center. Her head was resting inches from my shoulder. Her dark hair was fanned out across the pillow we were now effectively sharing, strands of it tickling my neck. But it was her hand that stopped my heart. Her arm was thrown loosely across the gap, her hand resting on the duvet right above my heart. I could feel the weight of her fingers, the heat of her palm seeping through the layers of cotton and flannel. I froze. My brain screamed at me to move, to retreat to the edge of the mattress, to rebuild the wall. This was the line. This was the fireable offense. But my body refused to obey. In the unguarded honesty of sleep, the Teflon was gone. She wasn't the boss. She was just a woman seeking heat in a cold room. Her breathing was slow and deep, a soft rhythm that brushed against my skin. She smelled of sleep and sandalwood, a scent so intoxicatingly close that it made my head spin. I lay there for an hour, paralyzed by the terrifying perfection of the moment. I watched the rise and fall of her chest. I memorized the way her eyelashes cast long shadows on her cheekbones. I knew that when the sun came up, the armor would go back on. The wall would be rebuilt, higher and stronger. But for now, in the stolen quiet of 3 a.m., she was holding on to me, and I let myself believe, just for a second, that she knew exactly what she was doing. When the gray light of dawn finally began to bleed through the curtains, neither of us moved away immediately. We woke up slowly, lingering in the warmth, the silence between us, heavy not with awkwardness, but with a shared, secret knowledge that the treaty had been broken, and neither of us wanted to fix it. By the time we hit Austin, the budget optimization policy felt less like a joke and more like a marriage. We had a rhythm now. I knew exactly how long Tessa took in the bathroom. 18 minutes, precise as a Swiss watch. She knew I needed the left side because I slept curled toward the window. We moved around each other in these hotel rooms with a practiced, terrifying domesticity. We shared toothpaste. We stepped over each other's luggage without looking. The awkwardness of Chicago and the panic of New York had calcified into a heavy, silent comfort that scared me more than the distance ever had. We were playing house in the Marriott, pretending that waking up to the sound of her breathing was just part of the job. Description: the conference was a sprawling beast, held in the suffocating heat of a Texas September. The air was thick enough to swim in, and the convention center AC was set to cryogenic. Tuesday night was the industry mixer at a rooftop bar on 6th Street. It was loud, crowded, and smelled of tequila and desperation. I was doing my job, holding a lukewarm beer, smiling at vendors, nodding at cloud architecture explanations. Then came Julian. He was a VP from a rival firm, young, ambitious, and wearing a suit that cost more than my car. He cornered me near the railing, turning his back to the crowd to create a private little pocket of space. "You're wasted over there," he said, his voice dropping to that pitch men use when they want you to think they're letting you in on a secret. He leaned in close, invading my space with the confidence of someone who's never been told no. Tessa's brilliant, sure, but she's a machine. You have warmth. We could use that at Sterling. He reached out and touched my arm. It was a light touch, fingers brushing my elbow, lingering on the bare skin. It wasn't aggressive, but it was possessive. I opened my mouth to deflect, to give him the standard polite rejection, but the temperature in the immediate vicinity dropped 20 degrees. Julian. Tessa didn't walk up. She materialized. She stood behind his shoulder, holding a glass of sparkling water like a weapon. She wore the navy blazer, the good day blazer, but her eyes were pure charcoal storm. Julian jumped, his hand retracting as if he'd touched a hot stove. Tessa, I was just telling your associate here how much we admire your Q3 numbers. I'm sure, Tessa said. Her voice was smooth, deadly, and completely devoid of humor. She didn't look at him. She looked at his hand, then at my arm, then straight up to his eyes. But I'd prefer you admire my assets from a distance. We don't share well. The double meaning hung in the humid air, sharp and undeniable. Julian blinked, his smile faltering. Right? Of course, just networking, Tessa. Network elsewhere, she commanded. She turned, her hand landing on the small of my back, a proprietary burning touch that branded me. Car. Now. The ride back was excruciating. The silence wasn't our usual comfortable quiet. It was a pressurized vessel waiting to rupture. Tessa stared out the window, her jaw set so tight I could see the muscle feathering. I sat on the other side, my skin still tingling from where her hand had rested. She hadn't been protecting the company. She had been marking territory. When we got to the room, the routine shattered. Usually, we would debrief, check emails, maybe order tea. Tonight, Tessa threw her keycard onto the desk with a violence that made me jump. She kept the blazer on. She paced the room, heels sinking into the carpet, turning at the window, marching toward the door. He was poaching you, she said, the words snapping out like gunfire. He was flirting, I corrected, leaning against the dresser, my heart hammering, and trying to poach me. It's what happens at mixers, Tessa. I don't like it, she spat, stopping in front of me. She was breathing hard, her composure cracking, revealing the wild, frantic energy underneath. I don't like him touching you. It looks unprofessional. Unprofessional? I laughed, a short, hysterical sound. We share a room, Tessa. We sleep 2 feet apart. I think we passed unprofessional 3 cities ago. She stepped closer, invading my space just like Julian had, but this time I didn't want to pull away. Her eyes were dark, searching mine, desperate and furious. That is different, she whispered, her voice trembling. That is internal. That is ours. Ours? I repeated, the word hanging suspended in the pressurized silence of the room. Tessa, there is no ours. There is a vice president, a junior associate, and a fake budget crisis that everyone in the accounting department knows is a lie. Tessa flinched. For the first time in 2 years, the Teflon didn't just crack, it shattered. She took a step back, hitting the edge of the dresser, trapped between the mahogany and her own fabrication. Her hands, usually so steady, gripped the edge of the wood until her knuckles turned white. It wasn't a lie, she said, her voice dropping to a jagged whisper. Not entirely. It was a strategy. A strategy? I stepped into her space, the anger and the attraction mixing into a volatile cocktail in my chest. We are up 40%, Tessa. We could buy this hotel? Why are we here? Why have we been sleeping 3 feet apart for 6 months? She looked up then, her eyes glossy, stripped of all the executive armor. "Because it was the only way I could have you," she breathed. The confession hit the air like a physical blow. "I couldn't ask you for a drink. I couldn't ask you to dinner. I'm your boss. It's forbidden. But if it was policy, if it was for the company, then I could wake up and hear you breathing. I could sit on the floor and eat fries with you. It was the only way to be close to you without breaking the rules." I stared at her, the realization washing over me. The austerity memo wasn't corporate greed. It was a desperate, convoluted love letter written in legalese. She had restructured the entire department's travel policy just to be my roommate. "You invented a fiscal crisis to be near me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I audited my desire," she said, a ghost of a sad smile touching her lips, "and I found the current distance untenable." The air in the room didn't just thicken, it ignited. The distance between us, the professional gap, the ethical line, the 3 feet between the twin beds, evaporated. I didn't think about HR. I didn't think about the hierarchy. I reached out and took her face in my hands. Her skin was burning hot. "Then stop sustaining it," I whispered. Tessa didn't hesitate. She surged forward, her veined hands gripping the lapels of my blazer, pulling me down to her. The kiss wasn't tentative. It wasn't an exploration. It was a collision. It was 6 months of armrest battles, shared silences, and stolen glances pouring out all at once. She tasted like the sparkling water from the mixer and pure, terrified relief. Her mouth was soft, urgent, demanding everything I had been holding back since the first day I saw her. The scent of her perfume, that signature sandalwood and gin mix, flooded my senses, drowning out the hum of the air conditioner. Her hands moved from my lapels to my neck, her fingers cold against my heated skin, anchoring me to her. I felt the vibration of her sigh against my mouth as she deepened the kiss, reclaiming every moment of distance we had endured. I backed her against the dresser, the wood creaking under the pressure. Her hands tangled in my hair, messing up the professional blowout, pulling me closer until there was no air left in the room that wasn't shared. It was messy and desperate and perfect. The Teflon Duchess was gone. In her place was just Tessa, a woman who had rewritten company policy just to be close enough to touch. We broke apart only when oxygen became a necessity, foreheads resting against each other, breathing raggedly in the quiet room. Her lipstick was smudged, her eyes wide and dark, pupils blown out. "So," she whispered, her thumb tracing my lower lip, her voice shaking. "Does this mean we're finally saving the company money?" "I think," I said, kissing the corner of her mouth. "We can probably afford the King Suite from now on." The next itinerary request hit my inbox on Monday. Destination: London. I opened the booking portal, bypassed the twin room options, and selected Executive King without a second of hesitation. Tessa watched me from her doorway, a knowing, proprietary smirk playing on her lips. The budget was officially blown, but the return on investment was spectacular. If you've ever blurred the lines between work and desire, hit subscribe. Let me know your story in the comments.